What is up, everybody? Happy Saturday morning to you. Welcome to another edition of the College Football Show here on RotoGrinders, the final Saturday in October. Happy Halloween to all of you out there. And crazy how fast the calendar goes by when you've got a sport that is only on the weekends and only lasts about 4 months out of the year. You're pretty much halfway through it already here with college football. So still plenty of money to be made. A nice little 12-game main slate on DraftKings today. We will break that down here for you over the next 45 minutes to an hour. I am Justin Van Zuiden. STL Cardinals 84 is the DFS handle. I've got John Laub alongside, as usual. John, how are you doing this weekend?
I'm doing great. We're having like a booming summer fall day out in the Northeast. So I'm getting ready, windows open, and getting ready for a long day of college football. Week 9. That's crazy already.
I'm jealous of the summertime weather there in the Northeast. Of course, I live in Northern Illinois, so we get the harsh winters here as well. But we are not experiencing the late summer here. It is currently 39 degrees and nary a ray of sunshine here for about the last 3 or 4 days. So that's okay. I'll cuddle up in a blanket and watch some football today. But those of you who do get to enjoy that balmy weather up in the Northeast, get outdoors and enjoy it here this weekend. As for the slate today, last week was maybe the first slate of the year where we kind of saw some chaos, quite a bit of injury news that broke like even after we were off the air. And then, just a little bit of a wonky main slate, some duds, some landmines out there. So it was just a weird slate. That tends to happen with the injury news in college football. We just got a little bit lucky the first half of the season. So buckle up. We'll see some more slates like that. As for today, we've got Quinn Ewers is unlikely to play for Texas. He's got a doubtful tag. Seems like they've called him week to week, so it seems like he's going to be out. Seems like Daniels is probably going to be out for Kansas again today. Riley Leonard is the big one. He is a game time decision for Duke this afternoon. That game is at 3:30. Probably won't know that status when we get to lineup lock at noon. Let's see. Brock Bowers is out for Georgia. He's going to miss about a month. So that's a big loss for them. Sounds like Xavier Leggett is going to play for South Carolina today. Those are kind of the big ones off the top of my head. Anything you're keeping an eye on as far as news and injuries this afternoon?
Well, there's one bet. Jawar Jordan, the running back at Louisville. It looks like he's going to be back today. He had been questionable. So, but I'm not really interested in the Louisville backfield, but that may affect the passing game in a positive way because Jordan is their most electric offensive player. I mean, there's Jamari Thrash, the wide receiver, but Jordan's a difference maker at running back. So hopefully some more first downs, hopefully some points on the board, even though I'm not interested in him. And I forgot, is Utah on this slate or is it on the FanDuel slate? Oh, they're playing USC. What?
Utah's playing Oregon, so they are on this slate.
And they're switching. Barnes is quarterbacking again for Utah. And I think they've won 5 games in which he started. So he's an interesting pivot at the quarterback position, possibly.
Yeah, they've shut down Cam Rising for the year, so we don't have to deal with that song and dance anymore. But Barnes accounted for 4 touchdowns last week against USC, and that kind of thrilling victory for Utah last Saturday night. So they'll need some offense today if they want to keep up with Oregon for sure. All right, let's go ahead and dig in, and we'll, as usual, start at the quarterback position, where Caleb Williams is certainly the number one guy on the board. He's the most expensive quarterback by quite a wide margin. Then you've got a little bit of a step down in price to Bo Nix, who won't carry much ownership today with a tough matchup against Utah. And you've got Dylan Gabriel and Jordan Travis, our other quarterbacks above 9,000 in terms of DraftKings pricing. How are you planning to handle this top tier today? And do you think anybody is a necessity here?
First, I think the question that I answered on yesterday afternoon, was Caleb Williams. And when I was putting together some sample lineups with Caleb at that 10.5, Justin, it just really became prohibitive salary-wise. So I understand for GPP if you want to go there, but we have a pretty nice projected ownership. It's not like I think you're getting any value on him. We have him at over 25%. He's just such a big name. I've decided that I'm going to pass on him in cash games also because the salary is just too much there. The player that I love today that I came back on, the difference with salary with the potential ceiling is Dylan Gabriel of Oklahoma. He had a little bit of a down week last week. I think he only threw 2 touchdowns in that game. Let me double check here 3 touchdowns against UCF, but he only had 22 rushing yards and he didn't get the 300-yard bonus. But I love him against Kansas today. Kansas is very kind on the defensive side of the football. Dylan Gabriel, I expect him to get back over that 300-yard passing threshold. Hopefully we get the 4 touchdown game. So I pivoted, and the player I love this week is Dylan Gabriel at the top end.
Yeah, Gabriel seems like he's going to be the most popular choice just because he comes at a discount. That $1,100 down from Caleb Williams does tend to make a difference and makes it a little bit easier to fit him into your lineups. The guy I like the most for tournaments is Jordan Travis. I just tends to be really low owned pretty much every week. Florida State, they just seem to be flying under the radar, even though they're undefeated. Impressive fourth quarter last week against Duke. I mean, they were down for most of that game. Travis, 268 passing yards, a couple touchdowns, added 62 rushing yards and a touchdown. He's a guy that's capable of getting up to 30 plus points. Good matchup today. The risk obviously is, if Wake can't keep it close, but Wake is at home. Hopefully they can score a couple touchdowns and keep that game at least semi-competitive. So I do like Travis for GPP builds at significantly lower projected ownership. Gabriel, I think, is the optimal choice in terms of cash games. And then, you mentioned it right before we came on the air, like Caleb Williams is just an interesting decision point today, right? Because he could throw, 5-6 touchdowns. But if you had him last week, you're basically dead in the water there.
Yeah, I mean, he could bust the slate, so I understand the challenge there. But they are also bad, California, defensively against the run. And USC can run the ball with Marshawn Lloyd and Austin Jones. So I just think that salary is too prohibitive this week.
All right, let's go ahead and move down into the next range of quarterbacks. You've got maybe 4 or 5 guys here in the 8K range. Carson Beck, obviously, without his top weapon now. I'm not a big Will Howard guy. He doesn't project very well today. Not a big Hartman guy either. I mean, the clear guy with upside in this next range is Garrett Green. We talked about him last week. Super kind of dual threat guy. 117 rushing yards last week against Oklahoma State. I mean, you just throw in that the last 3 games he's had at least 47 rushing yards, 4 rushing touchdowns total in that span. I mean, if you're going in this mid-range, is there even any conversation about Green not being that guy?
No, I 100% agree with you. It is Garrett Green. I do believe they're an underdog on the road, so the game script is very optimal for us. And we're going to talk about UCF later on, but they're going to put points on the board. And what we're looking for in CFB for that high ceiling with a good floor is we're looking for optimal game environments in which both offenses can push the ball into the end zone, right? So we have a UCF offense that will put points on the board, and that will force the Mountaineers to play catch up. So I love Garrett Green in this environment, Justin.
He's a fantastic option today, I think, at 8,100. I mean, if you aren't getting up to the top range of quarterbacks, I think you can absolutely throw him in your quarterback spot and go, with a couple cheaper options today. If you're looking to save some salary, the salary cap is a little bit tight today. So I've got no issues with Green in any format. Decent floor and ceiling with that rushing potential. So that he's basically the guy in the 8K range. Drew Aller, I suppose, is fine. Penn State coming off a dud, but they're like 32-point road home favorites against Indiana today. So I just don't see Indiana moving the ball at all against that defense. And then we get down into the 7K range of quarterbacks. There are a few more options in here. Obviously, it sounds like Malik Murphy is going to start for Texas. You've got Plumlee for the UCF squad that we just mentioned. Jack Plummer in here. Barnes for Utah. Who's your kind of favorite as we get down into this next range?
My favorite play is Plumlee, and I'm hoping that the legs come back. Yeah, he hurt his legs and he didn't really rush a lot last week. So there's a little bit of a concern there. He's actually a better thrower of the football this year than he's been in the past. But if you look to his game logs, his first 2 games of the season, he had 90 and 73 yards rushing. And I think he had 1,000 yards on his resume in 2021 when he first came to UCF. So I do love him in that environment. But the pivot to me is Donovan Smith of Houston this week against Kansas State. I don't think we've had much of Houston conversation on our shows this year because they tend to play at night or they're on some other, maybe on a Friday night or something like that. So if you look at Donovan Smith, his game log, he has really high ceiling here. He's a dual threat playmaker from Texas Tech. So in the last 3 games, he scored 27, 35, and 38 DraftKings points. I really like it. Isn't he under 5% ownership on our projection right now?
Yeah, 4.
I think he's a wonderful GPP pivot.
Yeah, at 4% ownership. And again, a lot of people just aren't familiar with this team because they've been seems like they've had a lot of night games. They've been on some of the night slates or just, kind of excluded from the main slate, based on their opponent or whatever. But they've been involved in 3 pretty high scoring shootouts the last few weeks.
Yeah.
Almost pulled off a big comeback. They were down 21-0 last week against Texas. Had the ball late in the game, down by 7 inside the red zone. So Smith, 378, 3 touchdowns in that game. Certainly a team that can throw the ball. So agree with that. I am fine with him in GPPs. I think Plumlee will be the chalkier play in this range at 7,200, just given that salary. I think a lot of people will play Plumlee and Green together in that game, which, I don't have a problem with. But who else you like here as we start to get a little bit cheaper at quarterback?
I think Max Johnson could be interested. Now, he has not hit what I would perceive at least to be a ceiling. I think the potential's there. And if you're looking for an interesting positive game script and you're looking for the matchup, South Carolina, I think they're in the bottom 5 in pass defense. So they're going on the road against Texas A&M here. So I think they're giving up over 300 passing yards per game, the Gamecocks. So I think Johnson's in a good environment here. My only concern would be that the Gamecocks can't continue to put points on the board. They've just had so many injuries at the wide receiver position. I wonder what Rattler and that passing game is going to do. But I think Johnson, if you're looking for a pivot or a lower end, I like him. And then the one guy, we've discussed guys like Nate Johnson when he started for Utah. Can you go wrong betting against USC, my friend? Their defense is just so bad. Fernando Mendoza, you might not have heard of him, but he got the start last week. He's the California Golden Bears quarterback. Now, we have to be careful. It's a 4:00 kickoff. It looks like he's going to start, but you never know with the Golden Bears. And their other starters are less salary, so you probably need to be active. But Mendoza is a very nice interest. He's bottom. What is he, like 45 or 5,400?
58.
Or something?
He's 58, and then
58.
the other two possible quarterbacks are both 54.
So I like the matchup only because all season long I've been going against that USC defense. I'm not going to stop right now, my friend.
Yeah, I mean, they've kind of been a turnstile there defensively. Just not a whole lot of resistance. Woo! I mean, you do have some options in other games that start super late, that you could go with Pitt Pitt quarterback. I think that game is maybe 30 minutes before the Cal game. But like you mentioned, all the other Cal options are cheaper. So hopefully we get some clarity on that before the game kicks off, and not a rotation or something. But yeah, otherwise I think Johnson, and Plumlee are probably the cheaper options that most people are going to look to today. All right, so let's go ahead and move to the running back position now. There are a lot of high-end options today. You've got Estime, Ott for Cal, Bucky Irving, Jonathan Brooks, who we've been talking about every week. Did not find the end zone last week, but did have 20 carries for 99 yards, and he also caught 8 passes. So it was a little bit frustrating to see the touchdowns get vultured from the other Texas guys last week, but Brooks to fall 1 yard short of 100, but still 20 carries, 99 yards, 8 catches, so 28 total touches. He's still the guy in this offense. Seems like Brooks is going to be the most popular kind of high-end running back choice today.
Yeah, I think there's no question. I've smashed him into like 90% of my cash game lineups. I always like to differentiate a little bit just in case you have an injury concern. But I mean, he's only the 4th highest priced running back. His ceiling is so high. You mentioned that Quinn Ewers isn't going to be quarterbacking today. You would think that Texas is going to run the football a little bit more than they have all year, changing at the quarterback position. So I love Brooks in this matchup. He's just outstanding. The interest in play here, if you look, I can't believe Audric Estime is the top priced running back. I was shocked by that because he doesn't have a ton of receiving upside. However, when I looked at our percentage, we have him at less than 3% ownership. If you're looking for a GPP alternative, this is a good matchup against Pittsburgh for the Notre Dame running game. There's a chance here that Estime could have 3 touchdowns. So I really like this matchup, and he seems to be going overlooked. I think that's a great GPP pivot. Obviously, I like Jaden Ott. We mentioned I have no problem ever going against that USC defense, but we do have him at 9% ownership in comparison to Estime.
And we know that even if Notre Dame's ahead by 5 scores, they're still going to give Estime the ball late in the game. So they've shown that they're going to do that no matter what. So the blowout risk really isn't that much of a factor with them. I say that somewhat in jest, but not really. So yeah, so Brooks is my favorite for sure. Obviously, Irving, Estime, those guys are all fine as well. Good day to maybe spend up for at least your favorite option at the top end. And then the next range, Lloyd, Benson, Devin Neal, maybe throw Giddens in there. Those are kind of your pivots for a little bit cheaper in GPPs. And then the kind of the cash game guys in the 6K range are probably going to be Singleton for Penn State and RJ Harvey for UCF, who's just too cheap. I mean, Harvey had an impressive performance last week, yardage-wise, against Oklahoma in a game where they nearly pulled an upset. And he's only 6,200. Singleton 6,300 in a game where Penn State probably isn't going to have to throw the ball. And then you've got, maybe those GPP guys in the middle there with Lloyd, Benson, Neal, Giddens. How are you kind of breaking down this 6K range?
My favorite play is Harvey. We'll talk about him later in the show, a little bit more detail, a little foreshadowing there. But I do like Singleton in this matchup. First of all, you mentioned it earlier. Penn State is coming off that was a bad game against Ohio State. They just did not get the offense untracked at all. I actually thought the defense played pretty well, but the offense gave them no help whatsoever. And the one takeaway that I got from that game, I thought they relied on Drew Allard too much. I don't know if it's a lack of receivers. I don't know if it's a lack of creativity on the passing game coordinator and just James Franklin. But I left that game thinking you cannot win games, Penn State, against upper-level competition if you don't run the football more effectively. So when I started looking at it, I broke it down. If you look at Singleton's game logs, when he has over 20 carries, he had 21 carries against Northwestern. He had almost 30 points. He ended up with a 25-point day against Delaware. when he had 25 and a half points. I don't understand how Singleton cannot have 20 carries today. It just doesn't make any sense. He's also the better pass catcher. I know that we have, Katron Allen there, so it probably takes away his ultimate ceiling, right? Because you're going to get Allen with some carries. But I love Singleton in this matchup because if you're Penn State, you've got to run the football today. And this is a great matchup. So I like Singleton a lot.
Yeah, and if you look just at the final score from Penn State's game last week, you think, oh, they kept it close with Ohio State. It really wasn't that close.
It wasn't.
Ohio State missed on a goal-to-go opportunity from the 1 yard line that they failed on a fourth down. They muffed a punt at midfield that they would have had good field position, and Penn State they missed a field goal, and then Penn State got a late touchdown. That made it with like 30 seconds left, that made it seem closer than it was. They should have lost by about 20 points in that game. So yeah, don't be fooled by the final, box score saying, hey, they only lost by, a touchdown. So yeah, I totally agree with that train of thought though. They should give Singleton the ball today. Even if they play as poorly as they did last week, they're not going to lose this game. So totally fine with getting some exposure there. And then, Harvey being the optimal play kind of in this range. I'll give you the floor as we go down to the next range, to the 5Ks. You got a few options in there. What do you like?
Based on game script and matchup, I do like Le'Veon Moss of Texas A&M. He's a freshman, but if you begin to dig deeper, in the last 4 contests, he has had over 15 carries per game. So we've seen a really nice uptick in the usage. Last week against Tennessee, the Volunteers, if you haven't been watching the Volunteers or you haven't looked, Tennessee's actually pretty stout up front. What a switch, right? They went from the wide open passing game last year. This year they're kind of playing it close to the vest. So Le'Veon Moss and that Texas A&M ground game was stymied. I expect them against South Carolina. We mentioned how bad the Gamecocks' pass defense is. I think this is a second half game for Moss. Aggie should jump out ahead. Well, what do you do as a home favorite, a big home favorite in the second half? You run the football. I expect Moss to have his minimum of 15 carries a game. If he gets into the end zone once or twice for you, he's only 5.2K. I like him in this game script. I like him in this matchup if you're looking for someone to save a little bit, and that's lower down the salary list.
Yeah, good game script. Seems like he's a pretty safe option at that salary, and there's not a whole lot else in here. So he's going to be the guy that a lot of people gravitate towards. You're basically looking at more risk reward options if you try to go elsewhere in here. Jaquez Moore for Duke seems like the kind of logical, cheap pivot at 4,900. You want to take a shot on that Oklahoma backfield again today?
Oh my God, we talked about it last week. And if you weren't watching, we were talking about Tawee Walker. And then what do we get, like 15 minutes before kickoff? I mean, I think it happened literally after we got off the air.
Yeah, it was after we were off the air for sure.
Yeah, and he wasn't going to play. I can't do it. I want to invest in the Sooners passing game. But the X factor that is very interesting, Sion Vakai. And if you haven't been watching Utah, and you probably did last week because they played USC, Sion Vakai is a safety. And they converted him to running back. He's only 5,000, but here's some of the craziest game logs that you could ever see. Last week, I think he scored over 20 points the last 2 weeks in a row. Last week, he had 5 receptions for 149 yards and 2 touchdowns. The week before, he had 15 carries for 158 yards and 2 touchdowns. We literally do not know how Utah is going to employ this young man. What we do know, he's incredibly explosive. He's fast as heck on film, and he's obviously a tremendous athlete making the transition from safety to running back for the Utes. Fascinating X factor. What a player. But, man, I don't know if I feel comfortable because I don't know how they're going to use him.
Yeah, I mean, I think you reserve him for GPP only. Sprinkle him in a couple lineups. He's pretty affordable. We mentioned that, there's not a whole lot down here in terms of cheap options. So I think he's fine for a sprinkle if you're looking for something, right around that $5,000 mark today. All right, let's go ahead and make the pivot here to wide receivers. An interesting kind of layout of this slate is that you'll notice the highest priced wide receivers, not a whole lot of ownership today. A lot of that is due to, Franklin is great, but he's got a tough matchup against Utah. Pearsall has a tough matchup against Georgia. Keon Coleman, Florida State's a huge favorite. USC, you never know what you're going to get out of the split of their pass catchers. So pretty much everybody in the top, 5 or 6 guys on the board, you're looking at likely sub 5% ownership today. Do you have a favorite maybe to throw into some GPPs, or you get into one of these guys in cash games, or what are you doing with this group?
Well, I think this is the interesting group to really differentiate in GPPs. So instead of maybe building a quarterback heavy or maybe just going with one big quarterback, I like this combo of Troy Franklin and Keon Coleman. You had mentioned Jordan Travis. I'm very interested in the FSU offense. And at least I believe earlier in the day, Johnny Wilson is not expected to play in this game, correct? So I do believe Keon Coleman is the guy. We have him at less than 4% projected ownership with a massive ceiling. Man, and Troy Franklin, last week was his first kind of down week. So I think people are scared off of the matchup against Utah. But, man, can the Ducks go down 2 weeks in a row? That's, we just saw USC did. So we know anything is possible in this Pac-12 conference. But, man, you give me Troy Franklin and Keon Coleman with their 2 ceilings at that low ownership. That's an interesting beginning to a GPP.
Yeah, and I love, I mentioned Travis. I love the Travis and Coleman combination in GPPs today. Definitely going to be all over that in a lot of my builds if you've got the salary to make that work. So like the logic there. I think Franklin and Coleman, if you're going top end, they're the options maybe you want to look at today. Most people are probably going to start in the mid-range at wide receiver. And it's just interesting. A lot of the projections are bunched today. Like there's not an obvious the quarterback, there's obvious plays with guys like Green. You go cheaper. You've got the chalkier kind of cheap guys at quarterback, Plumlee, Johnson. Running back, Brooks is going to be the clear play at the top. But even at wide receiver, I mean, we don't have anybody projected above like 17 points here. We've got Farouk projected at 17, Brendan Rice at 16. The Houston guys both right around 15. Thrash, Lambert Smith around 15. Drake Stoops 15. This is probably where contests are going to be won and lost today. Just a whole lot of guys that project similarly. I think Oklahoma was the team that seems to be standing out to you the most. So do you have a way of getting your exposure to this Oklahoma passing game? Is Farouk the choice for you, or what do you like in this 6K range?
Well, so it's interesting. Last week I took the wrong Oklahoma wide receiver. So I had Farouk last week. But I will say this week I'm back in on Nick Anderson. I've watched, he was, I call it an efficiency monster early in the year. If you don't know, he's a redshirt freshman. And he has 16 receptions, but crazy 8 touchdowns. But before last week, he was only getting like 3 or 4 targets a week, if that. All of a sudden last week, without Anthony in the lineup, Anderson stepped up and he had 10 targets. He had over 100 yards receiving, and he had 2 touchdowns. I want a part of this Oklahoma Sooners passing game. it looks like Dylan Gabriel is very comfortable throwing the ball deep to Anderson. I mean, a lot of his touchdowns are deep. I love Anderson. If you want part of that Oklahoma and you don't want to, pay for Dylan Gabriel, I think Anderson's the guy. Now, what's the ownership that we have? What's the difference between the two? Is it close at all?
It's close.
Oh, okay. Farouk is at 22 and Anderson at 17. I prefer Anderson right now. I think he's the eyeball test watching Oklahoma. Right now, I think he's the better player. So I'm going to go with Anderson by far in cash games. He's my guy there.
All right. I don't mind either guy. I think Farouk in GPP, I'll have maybe a little bit more exposure to. I like Thrash for Louisville. I mean, even if Jordan is back, if they kind of bring him in maybe a little bit slowly, I think Thrash at 6,100, we've seen him have some explosive games. Baker for UCF has had a couple strong games in a row. I mean, it's just there's a whole lot of kind of even projections in here. Also, you mentioned liking Houston a little bit here. So Samuel Brown, Matthew Golden, those two guys are fine as well. Anybody else you kind of want to give a head nod to in this kind of jumbled up middle range?
I mean, if you're stacking and you have Caleb Williams, if that's the direction you're going in, it's very difficult with USC receivers. What I like to do is come back with California wide receivers. There are two who are very interesting. Jeremiah Hunter at 5,500. Last game out, I think he actually ended up he didn't have any points against Utah. But before that, he has some really nice games at 21, 19, 18 DraftKings points. He's the home run hitter for the California Golden Bears, but he's a little of a up and down player. And then you look further down, where's Davis? Where's the wide receiver? His first name is Taj Davis. And in the last 3 weeks, the wide receiver for California has had 22, 12, and 17 DraftKings points. Taj Davis. He's under 5K. With Mendoza at quarterback, if you want to get access to Caleb Williams, I like Taj Davis and Mendoza coming back on the other side. So I do like those two players.
Yeah, and with Wilson out for Florida State, I see some people in the Discord talking about Jaheim Bell, we've bumped up the projected ownership on him. So he's only 4,200. Again, you're probably going to need to take one shot on a cheaper wide receiver today. And if I sort by our projected ownership, again, it's all going to be a little bit jumbled today. But so you just mentioned Taj Davis, Jaheim Bell is fine. The South Carolina cheapies are probably popping a little bit more with the older projected ownership. We're probably going to work to get a final revision in there. But with Leggett expected to play today, I think you can take maybe Trey Knox and Omega Blake down a little bit in terms of where their ownership is going to be. Anaya Smith for Texas A&M is still pretty cheap at 5,300. I think he is one of my favorites as well. Anybody else we've missed at wide receiver that you like today?
If I'm taking a shot on the USC passing game, I'm going to go Brendan Rice. It's very risky, but he does have a nice ceiling. I believe he leads USC in touchdowns for the wide receiver position. He does have a nice ceiling, but he also has a pretty big floor. But if I was going to go one wide receiver for USC, I'm going to go Brendan Rice.
Yeah, Rice seems to be the default guy that I kind of go to there too. If you're looking for USC wide receiver exposure at 6,400, I think we've pretty much touched on most of the options here today. It's a tough position to kind of navigate today with no kind of clear cut top plays. All right, we know this is usually the time some people might just now be tuning in. Wondering, who we like at the various positions, who's the key guys that I absolutely have to have today. So this is where we turn it over to John to give his fantastic 4 plays on DraftKings today, which I am in total agreement with on this slate. So take it away. Who you got?
Awesome. If you want to go to our lineup generator and you want to plug in my Fantastic Four today, I'm going to start with Garrett Green. His ceiling is so high. We have him projected at 23 fantasy points, but I believe he's had over 30 fantasy points in 2 of the last 3 weeks. You had mentioned it earlier. He had 117 yards rushing last game, at home against Oklahoma State. He's good at throwing the football. He's not elite, but for a college quarterback, he's very proficient. I love this game environment, so I love Garrett Green at quarterback. Plug him in. I have 2 running backs who I have in over 90% of my lineups this week. RJ Harvey of UCF. I do think the question is, do you want Plumlee or Harvey? I've decided that I like Harvey more. I think he's a little bit more consistent with the ground game. We saw what Ollie Gordon did last week against West Virginia. The Mountaineers are not very good in the front 7, so I think Harvey has a big day today. And then we mentioned it earlier, Justin. I'm all in on Nicholas Singleton. I like his ceiling. I have him projected. These are just my projections. I have him at over 25. We have him at 19.1 on our site. So I like Singleton a lot this week. And at wide receiver, I'm going and plugging in Nick Anderson. I want a part of that Oklahoma passing game. So my Fantastic Four this week is Garrett Green at quarterback, RJ Harvey and Nicholas Singleton at running back, and Nick Anderson at wide receiver, everyone.
All right. Like those calls today on what could be a little bit of a challenging slate. So we are in agreement there. And then, of course, as we usually do, we'll flip on over to FanDuel. Not as many differences as normal in the FanDuel slate. There's not a ton of great night games tonight. Tennessee and Kentucky, okay, I guess. But Ohio State, Wisconsin, probably not going to be the biggest fantasy gold mine game. Cincinnati, Oklahoma State, probably not going to be the biggest fantasy gold mine game. But you do have a couple good ones with Colorado taking on UCLA and North Carolina taking on Georgia Tech. I think those 2 games are going to get a good chunk of ownership on the FanDuel slate and on the DraftKings night slate. You can certainly stack up some plays in those games. North Carolina coming off a bad loss, projected for about 38 points today. Really like the options in their offense at all the positions this evening. So Drake May, one of the top quarterbacks on the FanDuel slate as well. What are you looking at over on the FanDuel slate today? We got a little bit of time, so we can just talk quickly through each of the positions separately. But what do you like on FanDuel at quarterback today?
The player that I've gravitated to is Drake May. You had just mentioned it. I like this spot on the road against Georgia Tech. Georgia Tech is just good enough with Haynes King at quarterback. They should be able to put points on the board, and that's the environment that we want. We don't like those blowouts, right? Because then they take the foot off the pedal. But we have a projected expected points are 38 for the Tar Heels and 27 for Georgia Tech. So I love that. And if you look at Drake May's last 3 games, and that's not coincidence with Devontae Walker coming back off the suspension, 39, 27, and 28 DraftKings or FanDuel points. And I gravitated towards him because he's only the 3rd price quarterback on this slate. He's only 200 more than Jordan Travis. And I like Jordan Travis here too. But Drake May to me is kind of like the value quarterback that's just sitting there that I wonder, what do we have for projected ownership? I didn't even look at that, by the
29.
way. We have him at 30%. But I love Drake May on this slate.
Yeah, I love him on FanDuel. I don't think Haynes King is a bad play either. I prefer him at the night slate on DraftKings. The price is a little bit high on FanDuel.
I agree.
To play him on the full day slate there, but those are certainly the guys that are going to get the ownership on FanDuel. If we go to the running back position, you've got Hampton here for USC. Carson Steele has kind of become the guy in the USC or the UCLA backfield. They get everybody's second favorite matchup, I guess, past USC against Colorado today, and Steele will be a popular option. Really not getting to Braylon Allen today in a game where Wisconsin's like a 16-point underdog. But Steele, the guy I like to highlight on FanDuel. And, I don't think he's a must now at his prices, but pretty impressive what Ollie Gordon has done there as a breakout guy at Oklahoma State. Anything else you want to touch on the running backs on FanDuel today?
You mentioned him quickly. If you want to pivot off of Drake May, I do love Amari and Hampton in this matchup against them too. It's hard to put both of them in your lineup. I think you have to make a decision, and especially when you have Devontae Walker, you might want to play him with Drake May. Well, we could talk about that. But why I like Hampton, when you're looking at GPP, we're always looking for ceilings. Hampton had 43 FanDuel points against Appalachian State and 34.7 FanDuel points against Miami. In every other game, he's had double-digit points. So you have a really decent floor with a massive ceiling. And if you watched North Carolina this year, man, when Hampton gets rolling, when he gets that lane, he's almost impossible. Like, he is a big boy. I think he's 225 pounds. He's got good speed, underrated speed. But when North Carolina blocks him up, and he's got that home run potential. So I like Hampton a lot right there. And then one player we haven't talked about on either, Devin Neal. This is a good environment for Devin Neal of Kansas. He's a pass-catching back. He's a home run hitter. He's playing Oklahoma today. They are at home. I think Devin Neal is a very interesting GPP play, both on DraftKings and FanDuel. But no, we haven't been talking about Devin Neal. That's a good environment for him.
Yeah, I think he's an interesting play as well today. No problem with plugging him into some lineups. Let's see. I think we've touched on most of the running back plays. Again, the extra games on FanDuel today, not a whole lot of extra options that you're not really considering already on DK. Maybe some options as we move to wide receiver. You've got the Colorado guys here in a game where they're probably going to have to throw. Of course, Marvin Harrison always in play. Anybody you like at wide receiver on FanDuel?
I think the question, if you go with Drake May, do you want to go with Devontae Walker? I do like him. That's a very good environment. We have him at 6% ownership. I think that's a really nice, healthy GPP number. Marvin Harrison is coming in at nearly 12%. I'm never going to tell someone not to play Marvin Harrison, but I don't love the environment. We've got rumors that Emeka Egbuka is going to play today. So I think that might hurt Harrison's ceiling. But I think Devontae Walker is the GPP kind of pivot if you want to get away from there. Now, this, ironically, all three wide receivers in Colorado are in play, Justin. But I don't like the matchup against UCLA. The Bruins are actually pretty good defensively. And because they're not great at throwing the football, they kind of grind it out. You mentioned you love Carson Steele. I do also. So look at the projected total for the Buffaloes, only 22 points. That's a very low projection. So I've been staying away from the Colorado wide receivers in this matchup here. I just don't like it too much. And then Javon Baker, I don't think we mentioned him. Have we at all? The wide receiver.
I mentioned him briefly on DraftKings, but
yeah. I think Javon Baker here, 7.5K. I think he's a very interesting pivot, and we have him at about 5% ownership.
Yeah, he's had a couple really strong games in a row. I think he's definitely a fine tournament pivot today as well. Let's see. Looks like they're still refining the projected ownership, but that should be getting close if you want to refresh that in a bit to get the most up-to-date numbers on our projected ownership. Of course, you can stay tuned in the Discord where we'll provide you plenty of injury updates last week as we headed up to lock. You can access that if you're just a RotoGrinders member. You don't have to be a premium subscriber. RotoGrinders.com/Discord and get into the college football channel there. So we're keeping up to date in the questions in the Discord. We do have a couple on the YouTube chat. If you're going for that Houston wide receiver today, Matthew Golden or Samuel Brown on DK, do you have a preference?
I'm going to go Matthew Golden, but man, I've been studying it. All three of those wide receivers rotate on the outside. It's very close, and let me get the name of the third, but I'm going to go Golden. That's my preferred because I like the touchdown equity. Golden I think he scored 6 touchdowns, and I'm not even sure if Brown has gotten into the end zone yet. I know if he has, it's only been once, but I'm going Golden there.
Okay, let's see. Any interest in Oscar Delp now that Bowers is out? He's only 3,200 on DK.
It's very difficult for me to go a pass catcher right now at the tight end. Delp is a freshman, or is he a redshirt freshman? I forgot. But I just don't see the ceiling like Brock Bowers. He might get in the end zone. He might have 4 for 45, but I just don't see the ceiling. I guess in cash, but there's no way I'm going him in GPP because I don't see a ceiling with Delp.
Yeah, I am not on him today as well. All right. I think we are up to date. Let's see. If you are, again, if you're interested in staying tuned with the updates, make sure you keep in tune with that Discord channel, rotogrinders.com/Discord. Also, lots of you watching on YouTube. If you like this show and want us to keep it here on the YouTube channel for free every Saturday morning for you, hit that thumbs up button before you close out for the day. Only takes 2 seconds, and we appreciate you tuning in and checking us out. And with that, probably a good time for us to call it a Saturday morning so we can go and finalize our lineups as well. Thanks as always for tuning in. Thanks to TJ for working hard early on a Saturday morning behind the scenes for us, producing the show. And as always, thanks to John for joining me as well. I am Justin. Have a great weekend, everybody, and we will catch you back here next Saturday, same time, same place. We'll see you then. Have a good one, everyone.